you. Can everyone see my screen? That's the first question.
Don't see the screen yet.
Yep. Oh, okay. I'll start sharing it in that case.
That's that.
Is that better? Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you for the introduction. Yes, and thank you for saying that we're wildlife friendly. We'd like to think so. Certainly, we don't want to be doing any damage. And I guess certainly we'll be working down towards smaller gardens, and Nick will bring you up to date with what he's doing in his garden. Before we start that, and as an apology, because when I was asked to do this talk, I'd sort of had an idea in my mind as how I was going to approach it, and then you get news coming through, as Roxanne says, with The Guardian and places like that, and the government unveiling their plans to restore 300,000 hectares of habitat across across England is a major sort of thing. Because of Nick, I started reading about the orchard, and then got involved in the book of rebirding. And I'd highly recommend that book, because it really is about large amounts of habitats which need to be produced in order to secure our current bird population and animal population, but also to bring back birds which haven't been around for millennia, for ages. 300,000 hectares equates to 27 Bristols, and I might rephrase that the next time I do this. Other information which came about was the fact that Guardian had posted about the most biodiverse cities, and it doesn't surprise anybody to sort of say that the closer to the equator, the more greener your city is, because you start off with a lot more biodiversity than we get in the Northern Hemisphere. However, NatWest also published the fact that we are the 5th greenest city, which may come as a surprise. I remember when I first started working in Bristol, I was told that we had more green spaces, squares and parks than any other city, and I think it's an unfair boast. We seem to have lost quite a lot of the greenery, but also I think with the greenest city, they've taken into account other various metrics such as car travel, etc. The picture which I'm showing is really, I would say, and I apologize if I offend anybody, but an architect's and a landscaper idea of what a green city will look like in the future. Lots of civic engineering, which in order to keep the plants alive and running alongside, the cars of traffic and public transport. Really, the way forward to reduce our carbon is to look at the transport, and we'll talk about that a bit later on. Right, next slide. So, looking big scale, first of all, working down towards the gardens and Nick's talk, and I'll try and keep this to 20 minutes. We have an infrared picture at the bottom of this screen, so if you can see the cursor moving now, of London. And what they've done is taken infrared of all the green areas, and all the trees are being picked up, and it looks a wonderful picture. It looks as if there's lots of white space, but there looks to be a lot of green infrastructure around London, with the river running through. WECA, the West of England Combined Authority, have actually produced a different system. So this is the top map, and there's an interactive map on the West of England Nature Partnership for those who wish to look at this. So it talks about what existing ancient woodlands we've got, what woodlands we've got, what more interestingly, what woodlands we could have. So it overlays where trees could be planted, and where the water margins could be broadened, so you've got a bit more marshland as well. So I'd recommend that from a large scale, but I'm trying to get through this rapidly. We've got some great organizations and on board. So Avon Wildlife Trust is a great source of information. The Bristol Regional Environmental Record Centre is the place I go for an ecological sort of overview. And they will work with groups in order to identify what ecology you've got in your area, and that should help point out what you should be supporting. RSPB and Plant Life are also two very good large organisations. I've put down here the books, and I'll send over this PowerPoint presentation. So if anybody wants to look at this in greater detail and click on the links, then feel free to do so. I've mentioned the Rebirding. Benedict MacDonald, I think, is Nick's partner in crime, and he sort of sets down a mandate for UK-wide strategy, and I can't recommend it highly enough. I'm still, well, I've just finished reading it. Great read, but also he makes some really good salient points, and really we should be signing up for making large-scale changes. Also mentioning the Map That Changed the World, so Simon Winchester's book, and that's on about William Smith and the geological maps that he formed in the 17th, 18th centuries. And that's worth looking at, because the underlying geology really sort of dictates what ecologies and plants survive in certain areas. And you do see how rich the UK is in geology, and therefore, we should be working with nature to make sure it's got the right soils, it's got the right topography, that we're at the right height, water, etc., etc., and that really is underlined by the book on geology by Simon Winchester. So it talks about the life of William Smith. I've put a picture here, a sort of indication of what this came from a conversation with Nick and I. What does nature need in order to survive? And it needs habitat, and it needs space. It needs an awful lot of space, depending on what species you're looking at. It also needs time. It needs to settle. It may be that it needs a niche, so it sits with other organisms in order to utilize the food resources which are around. And it might have a speciality which is required there. It might need a community. So if we're talking about plants, then there's a community of plants which survive around, and they co-evolve and cohabit and require. In order to thrive, you need to provide the right conditions in order to get reproduction going, and all life needs shelter, food, and water. And then specialists need light and dark. So that's what that slide represents. Heading down to a Bristol level, so all of that was outside Bristol, and we really ought to be keeping an eye on what's going on outside, because the estuary feeds the rivers which feed the Bristol area, and we ought to be aware of what's going on around Bristol. This isn't just about rewilding Bristol, this is about rewilding everywhere around it, in order that we can actually then bring in wildlife into the city. Bristol City Council have produced a Bristol Habitat Action Plan, and that looks at our the riversides, the rich grasslands which we've got, the calcareous grasslands up on the downs, but open mosaic habitats really at the end of the day is what we should be trying to achieve, a sort of selection so that so the biodiversity is attracted, fed, watered, etc., etc. In 2005, when this was written, hedgehogs, water voles, otters, and house sparrows were the sort of species which we were looking to conserve in the first place and enhance if possible. The image here is about Bristol Parks and Green Spaces, which was produced in 2008, and it looked at all the parks and open spaces. I saw the raw data, and it was a fantastic document. It's been slightly watered down, but its overall aim was to ensure that everybody, wherever they lived, they were within 9 minutes of a green space, that children were able to play 10 minutes away, that formal space is 13 minutes, you can read the rest yourself, but natural green space, 18 minutes. We're sort of, you know, the further you go, it just demonstrates really how far you need to go in order to find a natural green space, what they termed as that. And at that time, they were talking about wheel parks. So this is sort of relying on other communities in order to provide large park areas and getting out of Bristol to actually get to those. The Bristol Docks and River Avon, I might just try. God, this might go horribly wrong. I do apologise if it does. It'll take a little while. The great thing about Bristol is the water, the harbour side, and the river flowing in. We really should enhance these areas. Should be the starting point. This is a corridor, wildlife corridor running into the heart of Bristol. And there were reports undertaken, which I'll give you the links for if you want my PowerPoint presentation. And it talks about each and every area of the river, certainly within Bristol, and what we should be trying to achieve. So there's some really good organisations and individuals who are really trying to help us to establish wildlife within Bristol. Countryfile, I just wanted to mention, actually, Roxanne, you were sort of saying about, again, media sort of things. Again, if you look at Countryfile, it was talking about Bristol's last farm with yew tree farm, the last farm with a BS code. Again, if we're looking at rewilding, we've got to conserve these sort of areas and preserve it. It's slightly further out of Bristol than I thought it was. But the surrounding areas really sort of big impacts on us. And we really should be conserving. Then there's Bristol's planning strategy. It's something to keep an eye on if you're interested in making sure that that Bristol remains wild. And I'll bring that up quickly. So this looks at the ambitions and locations where Bristol are actually looking to increase housing populations, etc. And it identifies, as always, sorry, I'm trying not to be cynical actually, but green open spaces, because they're so easy to sort of say, well, that's a green open space, that'll be a next sort of development area. There are sort of grey brown sites such as this one here, but you know, the intensification of Bristol means that we're getting fragmented landscapes and habitats, and that just drives down the number of species which we're going to get around the place. Keep an eye also on, so currently there's a bus route to consultation that runs through Bristol, and it's got opportunities there. There's some really good landscaping which might go with it, but it's all been a bit, it's a bit like the first picture that I showed you. It's all a bit cosmetic and a bit architectural in my mind. And I think, again, if you read Rebirding, it's all about you know, wilding our spaces, making sure they're wild. What I'm really liking, and I'm sorry, Ben, if you're online at the moment, Ben Barker approached me, and he's talking about Bristol postcode action plans. Now, I really like this idea. It means you can sort of compartmentalize certain areas. Nature knows no boundaries, but if we're going to sort of tackle as a community our green spaces and make sure that they interconnect, then something like the Bristol postcode action plans are a good starting point. And what they have done is to look at all the green spaces which they've got at the moment. You'll also see the River Avon running to the north, and they're trying to sort of just raise the profile of these green spaces and then talk to the residences in between them to say, you know, these are existing habitats, how do we interlink with these? Really good way of doing it. And people who are around to help on this are the Bristol Naturalist Society. So I talked about the Record Centre, but the Bristol Naturalist Society are really good, very active, should be given all of our support. There are operations such as the Bristol Tree Forum, which is looking at all the trees within Bristol and protecting those and looking at planning and making sure that they're protecting the trees we have. I guess if there's a point to my talk, it's about let's conserve what we've got before we actually look at how we can then enhance it. Books which I recommend at this sort of level are The Meadow. John Lewis Stemple is writing about wild meadow over in Wales, where I am. The Orchard, which Nick is going to shamelessly promote. I'm sure he's got placement advertising somewhere if you look carefully behind him. Trees of Bristol is a friend of mine, Frank Drake, has written book Trees of Bristol, which just raises the profile of the trees which we have got. We've got a really good stock. And Bristol Plant Communities is a bit specific, but it sort of looks again at sites, and if you can identify what species of plants you already have, it gives you a good idea of what other plants would actually be supported in that same area. So again, working with nature, we've got to look at what we've got. First of all, we've got to know what we've got, and then we can start to enhance it. So when we talk about the wildflower meadows, it's good to know what grassland you've got beforehand in order to know whether it's collecting plants which are damp loving, whether it's in the sun, whether it's here, that, and the other, in order that you know what plants you're then going to plant and that they are going to flourish. So coming down from BS sort of levels, the University of Bristol. So we have 142 acres of grounds. These are the gardens and open spaces. I'm sure when I get to my next slide, it will probably contradict me. But we have over 5,000 trees. So my colleague, Kevin Stuckey, sort of looks at the trees stock that we have for health and to make sure that we've actually got the biodiversity which we actually require in there. So the reason why I'm sort of bringing this up is the fact that trees are a very obvious way of bringing wildlife in. It sort of raises biodiversity above us, really, all the activities which we do. If we don't want to disturb animals, birds, etc., we have to have a canopy. And Bristol had this ambition of having 30% coverage of canopy within Bristol over the next, I don't know, 20 or 30 years. And that seems to have died a death. So the other thing which we need to do as community is really to stand up, and whenever somebody announces things like this, you know, the 300,000 hectares that the government have actually identified for England in farms, let's stand up. If we think that's right-minded thinking, we need to stand up and support it and promote it and make sure it happens. So similarly, when items are identified within Bristol which make sense, you know, let's be upstanding. Let's wave our hands in the air and say, yes, let's have a bit of that. Sorry, I'm going on a bit of a high horse. Within the University of Bristol, we've got the 5,000 trees. That doesn't include the woodland. So we count trees where we have to inspect them on a regular basis because they may be a hazard. They're next to a road, pathway, person, etc. But you know, there's so many other areas of trees. And sorry, and the other note I've got here is the Botanic Garden. So the Botanic Garden is such a wealth of plants and material. They secure something like 60% of the native species in the southwest as their rare and threatened native flora collection. If you don't go to the Botanic Gardens, then I'd suggest you do. It's a great way of knowing about plants and how they survive. If we're talking about details, you know, we really ought to be looking at the river for invertebrates, for plants, for invertebrates, for, you know, before we get to the vertebrates, the mammals and the birds, you know, we should be looking after the soils first of all, then looking after the plants that we have and conserving those. They will allow the invertebrates to breed, and then, you know, hopefully we get a larger megafauna being supported by that. Again, within Bristol, we've got, within Bristol University, what I've always tried to achieve, and I've got my predecessors to thank for this as well, is a really rich collection of trees. but also the way we sort of manage. So we've got management practices on this in order to keep certainly lawns to look pleasant, but where we can rewild, we do so. And we are supported by Rupert Higgins from Wessex Ecological Consultancy. He looks at key animals and birds within our estate, and he can sort of direct us if we're going in the wrong direction. As far as the maintenance is concerned, he certainly sort of promotes certain areas and activities which we can do more of and what we should do less of. We have a green infrastructure strategy which is being written currently. We also have a biodiversity strategy, so we know what key species we have and which we need to achieve. And we also have a management strategy, so it tells us, we're a university, it's an organisation, we've got to attract students and staff, and well-being areas are great around the university, and everyone is welcome to come up to the precinct and have a look around and check out the public art. I'm not promoting it for that sake. It's basically is a good oasis within Bristol, which very few people actually make the use of. Maybe stay away from the Freshers' Week when the students start, but otherwise come on board. And we're governed by, we try and achieve the Green Flag Award. This is a third-party award, not the Breakdown Company, but it's a Blue Flag Award. People keep Britain tidy, and they award us with a green flag for managing our grounds well. And in order to do that, we have to make sure that we promote the grounds, that people find it friendly, that they can go walk around the gardens and get around the gardens, and that there are features within the garden, such as, my colleague Simone is leading on the Hedgehog friendly campus. Now this sort of brings in areas which are less well maintained, in inverted commas, in order to promote areas for slow worms, beetles, again, the invertebrates, in order to feed the hedgehogs. And we may or may not have hedgehogs on the campus, certainly maybe up in Stoke Bishop we do, but the fact that we're actually trying to achieve an environment habitat which is supports hedgehogs means that we're supporting all the flora and fauna underneath the hedgehogs in order to provide them with a habitat to survive. And we get involved with the student conservation groups who look after some of our woodland, actually down at Long Ashton. So that's a way of actually educating. The last, I think it's probably, one more slide after this, but 142 acres within Bristol, including habitats such as woodland, orchards, farmland, parkland, the wildflower meadows, which we support. So knowing that you've planted up at Clifton Hill is fantastic. I think meadows, we've got a very large meadow down at the back of Goldney now, and all of these meadows, flower pollen rich grounds, habitats are very beneficial for us as a whole. Bristol covers 25,600 acres. So in comparison with the 142 which we manage, who are the other biggest landowners? If we're going to have an impact and sort of drive the owners of the land, and this may be Bristol City Council and the highways, and it's a case in the parks. It's a case of making sure that we influence them, and there's an awful lot of acreage there which we could actually have as green space to bring nature into Bristol. So this is my last one. So I am talking about influence and impact. I'm quite happy when people get in contact with me and sort of say, can you do this and can you do that? Certainly we want to connect with BS people. We occupy areas of BS9, BS 8, BS, we will do with BS1. And if we can help to help our neighbours, then that will grow a stronger community. And really what I was trying to say is, the more space that we connect up, the more connectivity, the more wealth of grounds that we have well maintained, then the more likely it is that we're going to bring and support wildlife within the city of Bristol. So shared spaces and allotments, community orchards, if we can do community orchards, that's a fantastic way of making sure that you get your neighbours and talking about green areas. Neighbourhood gardens, if you are really passionate about this, you ought to be influencing your neighbours so they don't keep on taking up their front gardens and turning it into car parks, and that they don't take up the back garden because it's so small that it turns into a muddy patch in the winter for their kids, and they put down astroturf instead. We need to maintain our neighbourhood. We need to be promoting, informing, educating our neighbours, our community, in order to get bigger, better, more connectivity within our gardens. And so, the biggest influence impact is actually your garden, your space. But as Roxanne says, if you can then sort of get out and broaden your interest and impact on the local community, it raises the profile no end. So over here at Carewent, we've got Carewent Meadows, which is 14 acres of meadow land, which we're trying to promote and raise in what is basically the Roman town. But in my back garden, I grow a patch of wildflower areas, and I'm sure now, in handing over to Nick, he will tell me what I should be doing in the garden. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alan, for that. Just before we leave that, you mentioned just now the importance of neighbours and community, etc. If I could just give a shout out to one of the resources on our website for West Bristol Climate Action are some wildlife friendly gardening videos. And one of those is the communal gardener. And you will see there the lady who's running the communal garden at the Polygon Terrace, and she describes how they basically turned that from complete wilderness into a lovely neighborhood garden, and they're doing it in a wildlife friendly way. So if anyone wants to see that, because we've got quite a lot of communal gardens that got active during lockdown in this area. The subject of another of our videos is in fact Nick Gates, and his video is called Henbury Haven. So if you like what you hear following now, also check out his video on our website. So without further ado, over to Nick.
Thank you, Roxanne, and thank you, Alan, for sort of teeing it up. Alan covered the big things, and I'm going to cover the other end of the scale with the smaller stuff that you can do in your own garden. So I've been a naturalist for as long as I can remember. I'm also a wildlife producer by day, but when I come home, I love trying to make my garden grow wildlife, and this is something that I've been doing for a long time, particularly since I had my own house and my own garden. But alongside this, I have done this parallel project, as Alan mentioned, with a book called Orchard. So for the last 8 years, we've been studying this orchard site up in Herefordshire. It's a phenomenal site for biodiversity. And what I did was I took a lot of the principles that these phenomenal wildlife farmers were using, and I decided to distill them and work out exactly what it is that makes an orchard site tick, and how I could apply those principles to the small scale, and how we can all apply them onto a garden wildlife level. And it came down to 3 very simple rules. If you can give animals, or the creatures that you're trying to attract into your garden, somewhere to feed and somewhere to breed and or somewhere to hide, there's a very good chance that you will up the biodiversity value of your patch of green space. So this is what I inherited. This was the garden when I first moved into my house 8 years ago. It was what I would consider a standard garden. I live on the back of a council estate in North Bristol, up in Henbury, and all the gardens are quite similar. We all had half a shed. We all had this rectangle of grass. And I looked at it and thought, that has so much potential to be so much better for the species that I want to attract. And so I've sort of worked my way through it a little bit at a time and added things to it that with varying degrees of success, and I'll talk about the things that have worked shortly, to try and get as many different species as possible to use, to choose that garden and to use it for part or all of their life cycle. This is what it looks like now on a nice summer's day. You can see the structure in there. You can see the heterogeneity, we call it, lots of different things, lots of different species of flower, different species of shrub, different species of tree, different sword lengths, so grass that's very short through to meadow that's quite tall. I do have some ornamental flowers in there. I grow raspberries for myself and lavender for myself, but I've always tried to choose plants and make changes in the garden that have a benefit to the wildlife that uses it. And you can see that it's just a jumble, and across the year it looks like this. It's got lots of different things within it, and all of those choices depend on what I've been trying to attract to the garden. So the first point, somewhere to feed. What does that mean? It's really simple. You know, the most simple thing you can do in a garden to attract new species is probably to put up a bird feeder. So that's something that lots of people do. But there are lots of other things you can do, right down to the nitty-gritty of finding a particular food plant for a particular species of butterfly or moth or beetle, and trying to encourage them by planting that or providing that food plant. So, you know, you can see the variety of things in there. All of those are put in there for those different species. Bird tables or fruit tables. In this case, I built a mini sky table for butterflies. That's also very attractive for thrushes. The magpies come and use it. And fruit tables are great for lots of invertebrates. So you might see the butterflies using it, but there are dozens of different species of small fly that will love to feed on rotting fruit. So later in the season, if you have planted a couple of fruit trees and you've got some fallen fruit, you can leave some of it on the ground, but put some of them in on a sky table and just reap the rewards of seeing how the butterflies and the flies use that. Another really simple tip in terms of the sort of entry-level things you can do are planting species like teasel. This is nature's bird feeder. Teasel is fantastic for goldfinches. And if you haven't got any teasel grown in your garden and you find some, you can snap a few bits off, stick them in your garden, and buy Niger seed. You can top up the teasel with Niger seed, and you will get goldfinches straight away in your garden. You'll be able to attract them within a few days if they're in your area. Once you start deciding what you're going to plant in the garden, it's really important to consider nectar flow. Nectar flow refers to a flower which is producing nectar, and flowers of different species will produce nectar for the whole year. Your peak nectar flow window will run from about March through to the late autumn, and generally it's the trees that produce nectar first in a season, and then the bulbing flowers, and then the seed flowers and perennials and annuals as you get later into the season. But encouraging a few different tree species in your garden, particularly sloe, hawthorn, small shrubbing trees that can be pruned easily, that don't take up a lot of space but produce a lot of flowers, is a great way to encourage the insects that really need that into your garden. And of course, putting in a meadow space. We've already spoken, earlier in this talk about having a meadow space. Meadows are incredibly easy to establish. You can put a meadow in a plant pot. You don't need a lot of space to establish a meadow. But obviously assign as much space as you can, and you'll get the benefits both visually and with the species that come to use it. This is what my garden will look like on a typical summer's day. You can see there's lots of different pockets. They're all tiny. All of those decisions being made are small pockets, a small pocket of a certain species of grass, a small pocket of a certain species of flower. I've tried to put in micro wildflower meadows. I've tried to put in micro stands of smaller species, smaller stands of species like teasel and ragwort, and all of those I'll come to in a second. When you put in things like a wildflower meadow, you don't only benefit the species which feed on the flowers, you also benefit the species that feed on the species that feed on the flowers. So, by putting in lesser knapweed, which is that flower on the left there, you will attract various species of butterfly. Lesser knapweed is one of the very best species for producing nectar, particularly in drier areas. It's got a very good nectar flow. And I was delighted to get marbled whites. They're quite a rare grassland butterfly now, but I had marbled whites coming into the garden. Sadly, the photo on the right isn't in my garden, but I have had crab spiders. This is a darker morph of crab spider. So by encouraging species in, you will find that you are getting a lot of others that accidentally you will start to notice. Another great set of species to grow really easy are the alliums. So go into the supermarket, buy a garlic, ideally an organic garlic, break it up into its cloves, plant that in the ground, and you get free bulbs. Obviously, you get lots of ornamental species of allium, everything from these bright purple numbers like this one on the left, through to very small white garlic flowers. They are fantastic for hoverflies, for butterflies, but particularly for the various different fly species. Again, by having that diversity of flower heads with short flowers and long flowers, you will provide food for the different species of insect. Some nectar-feeding insect species are short-tongued, some are long-tongued. Butterflies obviously are famous for being very long-tongued, but some bee species and fly species in particular have incredibly small proboscis or no proboscis at all, which means they feed on very flat flowers. But by providing that variety of different flowers, you will attract a greater variety of invertebrates into your garden, and you'll get species like this turn up. So I was out in the garden one day and I noticed this gorgeous little wasp species. And with the help of Twitter, I identified it as an ectemnius wasp. There's a great chap called Stephen Falk on Twitter. If you ever get an unusual species of fly or wasp or bee, ping it over to him and have a look on his Flickr site. He will help you identify these new species. If I didn't have those alliums and I wasn't providing the food for the hoverflies, there's no reason for the wasp to start using my garden. But now that is a breeding species in the garden when it wasn't before. And again, when you're putting in flowers and things, make sure you're putting in food for yourself. A garden is a space which it's very easy to create a shared space. You could just say, right, I'm going to give the whole garden over to wildlife, but it's better to try and say, all right, I'm going to make a garden that's completely usable for me, and I'm going to share it with wildlife as much as I can. So if you're putting in those fruiting species, apples and pears, obviously, but also the soft fruiting species that produce lots of smaller flowers, provide fruit for you, and obviously the fruit that you don't eat will provide fruit for the wildlife. And as a bonus, every now and again, you'll just get a completely random species turn up. This is a purple hairstreak, a pretty rare species of butterfly that I found one day just basking on one of my raspberry leaves. The benefits of growing a wildlife garden and putting in that mix of different species are that your garden will become more and more attractive, and that if an unusual or rare species happens to be flitting through, as this butterfly was that day, it will probably choose your garden. And Alan spoke about connectivity. By providing that little mosaic of habitats in each garden, you're providing a stepping stone for these species to spread throughout the city again. So that sort of covers somewhere to feed. Now, somewhere to breed is a little bit more involved. It involves finding out the species breeding requirements and providing for them. And some of these sites can be really, really specific. There are certain species of bee that like to nest in a certain humidity of clay. There are certain species of bird that look like a very particular cavity, but there are an awful lot that you can attract to your garden. The first and the easiest are to attract the invertebrates. Again, there are probably 300 different species of macro moth that you might be able to attract, and well over 100 within the inner city Bristol region. These species, these two moths, both were found in my garden. The one on the left is a privet hawk moth. That's the largest moth in the whole of the British Isles, the largest breeding moth. What a fantastic species to be able to show people, particularly children, get very excited when you see this moth, which is a good few inches long. And then you get the very colourful moths as well. The scarlet tiger, one of the day-flying moths. Again, just by providing the food that it likes to breed on, then you are likely to attract those species to your garden. But if you haven't put those species in, they simply won't stop in your garden unless you're providing them one of those other things that they might need, perhaps somewhere to feed. This is an example of my garden on a typical late spring summer's day. I can go out there and find all of these different exciting species of caterpillar. The mullein moth feeds on the two common species of mullein you can get that are very easy to grow in a garden. Cinnabar moths, you may well have come across, feed on ragwort. Ragwort gets incredibly bad press because of the effect that it can have on livestock. We must remember when talking about ragwort that wild horses and wild cows survived for hundreds of thousands of years in this country without any detrimental effect from ragwort whatsoever. It's when ragwort is dried and given to them in their fodder, that's when it becomes a problem. So ragwort as a food plant and livestock can be completely compatible. And I know farmers who are more than happy to run their livestock in a ragwort field as long as they've got lots of other fodder choices. But in a small garden, it's a really safe plant to grow, particularly for species like the cinnabar moth, which does a very good job of absorbing those toxins that are within the leaf. Privet hawk moth caterpillars. I mean, look at the size of that caterpillar. It's absolutely gorgeous. Again, a very easy one to attract. Just luck of the draw. May have chosen your garden. And other species like eyed hawk moths. All of our hawk moths have a very particular diet. You provide those plants for them, and they will at night find those plants, lay their eggs on them, and there's a good chance that you will be able to find those caterpillars. Often by looking for their poop on the ground underneath the trees is the way to find them. And but some are even more specific than that. The orange tip butterfly lays its egg on one particular species of flower, the cuckoo flower. If you look in that central picture, you can just see a little orange egg just up from my thumb there, or just off the left of the center. And in the right-hand image, you can see a tiny caterpillar. You either will have, but there's maybe two other species that it likes to lay on. Garlic mustard is another one. But by providing those plants in a garden, you have a chance of having those butterfly species come and lay their eggs, because they can cover huge distances. Female butterflies, once they've mated, can cover kilometers, laying their egg at irregular intervals. The orange tip only lays one egg per plant. It's very particular. So even if the orange tips aren't in your garden at the moment, by putting the plants in within 1 year, there's a very fair chance that you will be able to attract them. And that's the butterfly that results. What a spectacular species. Water is another essential. There are many species that cannot complete their life cycle without access to water. So one of the very first things I did in this garden was I dug a pond. Not a huge pond, not a pretty pond. For the first year, it looked ugly as anything. But after a few years, and I let it grow over, and put various different pond plants in it, and it now looks like a right jumbled mess of all of these different species. I've tried to put in as many native species in the pond, tried to avoid non-natives. And as a result of putting in that pond, within a year, I had newts in there breeding. And there's sort of really nothing more exciting than having dug your own pond and going out there and finding newts that have appeared. In the wider landscape, they're able to smell the water and will crawl towards it. And I'm lucky enough to now have all 3 species of newt in my pond. And they only use the pond for a few months of the year. Newts are terrestrial. They don't need the pond for a lot of the year. They feed on land, but it is essential that they have it to breed in. Obviously, a pond can be used by other species. Dragonflies are another one, that they have these eyes that are able to detect water because they can pick up wavelengths that we can't see. They'll fly quite high over a housing estate. They'll look and scan for water, and they will search out any spot right down to the size of a bucket, will attract dragonflies and come and check it out. They might just lay a few eggs in it. But a small pond like mine, which is maybe 6 foot by 5 foot, will hatch anything between 30 and 50 dragonflies each year. So it really does make a big difference, even if you just put in a small pond. And these are the larval cases. They're called exuviae. So when the dragonflies hatch, they leave these behind, and that's a good way to count how many dragonflies have hatched from your pond in a given season. Sort of little bits of nature treasure as well that you can keep. And I don't know if you can see my thumbnail because it'll be so small, but I like to keep these in little pots and compare all the different species that have hatched out the pond. This was one day I went out to my garden last year. You can, if you look carefully in that picture, you can see 3 hatched southern hawker dragonflies. Again, one of the very large species. So I've got one of the biggest species of dragonfly and the biggest species of moth using my small urban garden. And you can see the 2 that have just crawled up the stem there that are about to hatch. And finally, bird boxes. Bird boxes are again, a really, really easy way to get more species breeding in your garden. There are quite a few species that we call obligate cavity nesters. They have no choice but to nest in a cavity to complete their life cycle. Famous ones include blue tits, great tits, starlings, and obviously these were once woodland species, but they've adapted very well to the urban landscape, and the only thing they need is a breeding space. They're often good places for them to feed, and if you provide them with a cavity, there's a very fair chance they'll use it. Almost all of my nest boxes that I put up in urban areas get used in the first year. Now is a brilliant time to put up nest boxes, by the way. Get all your nest boxes up by February if you can. And birds are already checking out nest sites. They are very, very busily starting to proclaim their territories. The dawn chorus is just getting started. And if you put nest boxes in your garden for species like robin, which is bottom right, blue tit and great tit, which are the two, the central box and the one top right, and starlings, which is the box top left, you will obviously be rewarded with that bird song, because those birds will be holding those territories in your gardens as well. This nest box is one I put up on my parents' house in Sussex, and that starling box was used in the first year. They've double brooded in that every year since. So just by putting up that box, that's an extra probably 20, 25, 30 starlings in the world. And obviously boxes are a great way to get young people involved in nature, because they can so often be opened, and it's fantastic to see the look on a youngster's face when you show them, let them peek into something like a blue tit box and all the babies burst up calling for food. It's a magical experience. And this is a photo I took within my own in my own garden in a camera nest box for great tits. Getting back down to the smaller stuff, even in a balcony garden, you can attract various different species of solitary bee. So instead of having a log store, think of having a bee hotel. Think of taking those logs, drilling any size holes between about 6 mil and 10 mil, irregularly throughout that. Solitary bees are fantastic at finding those. They will they again scan the landscape a bit like the dragonfly will, just with a search image for holes. And if you make that sort of thing now, you can see that photo was taken in about February or March in the top left there. By April and May, they're being filled up with mud, because that's what the bees use to block up the ends of the holes. And inside there will be lots of eggs split up into little chambers that the solitary bees of various different species will have used. And again, once you attract the solitary bees, you then attract the solitary bee predators. So that picture bottom right is a sharp-tailed bee, which is one of the species which parasitizes the leafcutter mining bee. And finally, give those species somewhere to hide. And if you can give species somewhere to feed and somewhere to breed and somewhere to hide, they're going to use your garden all year, and you've created a fantastic habitat for them. One of the most exciting species that I was fortunate enough to inherit in the garden when I bought the house were slowworms. I found a few slowworms, and I thought, right, I can make this garden really good for them. So I went about collecting up slates and rocks. I put those all around the garden. I probably got about 30 of these slates and rocks scattered around the place. And they're very good solar little radiators. They warm up and they project that heat underneath them. So species like slowworms love to bask under them. And on a sunny day, I can go out there and I can find this spaghetti of about 30 slowworms under one of these slates on the top of my compost heap. Other species that need cavities, mice, voles, some are able to create their own spaces by digging into your lawn and things. But if you provide, low down nest boxes, you might be lucky enough to find mice using them. Simply by testing. Sometimes I happen to leave a pile of nest boxes along the edge of my garden because I didn't have the time to put them up one weekend, and when I got back I went to check them and there were mice in them, so I had to leave a few of them there because the mice had decided they were a good safe place to hide. And I realized that that would improve the habitat for those species. And obviously if you're providing for mice, you're providing for tawny owls, you're providing for the other predators that are coming to use them, to come and to feed on them. Nest boxes are fantastic for bats. So after the birds have used them in the spring and summer, you will find that solitary bats, perhaps males out searching, or youngsters dispersing, will be using those nest boxes. So leave them up for the whole year, and particularly woodcrete, which is a type of box which is a composite of cement and wood shavings. Those boxes are particularly attractive to bats. These are just two of the ones that I've found in my nest boxes over the years. Obviously, if you find them like that, just close the box up and leave them to it. They will be just fine. And by providing a bit of a meadow in the garden, you will be able to provide for species like this nursery web spider. So I don't know if any of you saw the natural history series, The Mating Game, earlier this year, but there was a sequence on these, and those spiders came from my garden. You saw in the first image how big my garden is, but I have a really strong breeding population of these. They're one of the only species of spider in Britain. There are 3 species of spider in Britain that produce these orb egg sacs and carry them round with them. Just by having a meadow patch in the garden, you will encourage species like that to be using your garden. There are lots of other things you can do, providing stands of deadwood for the various different beetle species. But if you're providing those 3 things across the year, you will get greater bioabundance in your garden and a greater diversity of species. This is what my garden can look like on a typical winter's day. So we often concentrate on the summer, but by leaving that structure in the garden during the winter and providing a bit of supplementary feed, I've got a colony of house sparrows, which is probably 20 or 30 strong, that nest in the boxes that I put up in the roof, that feed on the grasses that I leave in the garden, and I top up with grain for the winter season in particular. And finally, not everyone has the opportunity to have their own garden, and if you don't, then don't be afraid to ask. I've got some friends in London. My friend Brian decided to ask his local council if he could adopt a patch of green land, and the council said yes. And this is something which can, you don't ask, you don't get. This is a little tiny patch of wildflower meadow that we've put on our local roundabout. Even these little tiny patches of green space can make a big difference to the local species, just by providing those stepping stones to bees, to butterflies, to invertebrates, by having that nectar flow there. And if you see habitat management that you don't like, email the council. There is a feedback form on the council's website. I personally think that much of the Downs is managed far too sympathetically to dog walkers and not sympathetically enough towards wildlife, and I regularly remind them of that, and I've had some success. This is the alternative. This is a verge side in South Bristol in Pill, so it's actually within the jurisdiction of North Somerset Council, but this is if you ever go out to the M5, the Southway, you'll see this nature reserve on the side of the road brimming with orchids. It's absolutely fantastic plot, and that's the alternative. And it's quite easy to achieve that if there's someone local who's prepared to take that on as their little challenge, with a couple of years of seeds and the correct mowing regime. You can turn a very boring verge into a fantastic wildflower meadow brimming with those rarer species, just with a couple of years of green hay. And finally, gardens are a completely managed landscape. We want to make them wilder, but it's important to remember that it's up to us as managers of those green spaces to decide how we want to share it. And you can choose to give it completely over to wildlife, but it's important to try and enjoy your green space. This is me and my chooks. I like to sit out in the garden with my chickens. Got a couple of tortoises there. It's a space that is very much managed with helping the local wildlife, but it's important to be able to use that space yourself. Just topping up on Alan's links, that here's a few other great people to get in touch with. Avon Needs Trees, many of you may have come across. Avon Wildlife Trust, of course. Grow Wilder, if you're looking for plug plants or to put into any of your meadows, then go to the Grow Wilder nurseries, have a look. The Orchard Project are a small charity that are really good at providing advice for community orchard growers, and the others have already been mentioned. Thank you that is the end of my talk.
Thank you so much, Nick. And we've got lots of questions that have come in. So if I can ask you or Alan, just before we get to the questions, just in case anyone has to leave, could I just quickly mention our next events? So on the 8th of February, there will be an online screening of Burnt, Our Trees, the New Coal. And on the 16th of February, there will be an online talk, How to Improve Your Home Sustainably. Okay, so those are the two next events. Right, to questions. Thank you very much for the people who've posted them. So first one, if you live in a flat with just a window box, what would you recommend? So first to Alan.
Yeah, it's a similar sort of question which we have for green roofs as well, because you've got quite a minimum amount of growing medium in there. You're sort of looking towards the Mediterranean and self-contained sort of plants. So I would personally be growing sort of herbs, so as a benefit for yourself as well as flowers for insects. And the fact you keep on picking them over means that they are controlled, that you're studying them and having a bit of respect for them. So that would be my advice. Nick?
I completely agree with that. Yep, those dry loving species that do very well, Mediterranean herbs, I couldn't agree more. I think if possible as well, it's not just about growing. You can provide habitats for some species, particularly solitary bees, like that solitary bee hotel that I showed. You can do those on a very small scale with bamboo tubes. You can do those vertically, so you can have a very narrow, very tall one that just sits on the side of a balcony space. Solitary bees are always short of new nest holes and will always find them.
Thank you. And I think
there's a question there on solitary. Sorry.
Yes. I think you also mentioned you could do a wildflower meadow in a container, and just a plug there for our local business, Smaller Footprints. They sell bee bombs. So those are almost perfect for containers. So if you've got a window box, bee bombs if you want a mini wildflower meadow in your window box. Great, thank you. Next question. Somebody asks, how can I attract and feed small birds when the main visitors to the garden are pigeons, magpies, and squirrels?
Shall I go on that one?
Yes, please, Nick.
So there's a fantastic lady on Twitter called Kate McRae. She goes by the handle Wildlife Kate. If you're really struggling and you're only getting those bigger species to your feeder, she's pioneered a method where you basically use a dog crate. There are lots of different excluder devices you can use to try and prevent those larger species, but have a look at her live camera, which is basically a dog crate that's got the bird feeders hanging inside it, and obviously only the smaller species are able to get inside that dog crate. So if you're particularly keen, then you just want to be feeding blue tits and great tits and robins and those sorts of species, then that's one method to do that. Another method is to try and put them very close to the house. Some birds will be too scared, and the more intelligent birds will maybe too scared to come right to the house if you've got a bird feeder hanging outside a door, for example, that's regularly used by people. Whereas the tits and the finches generally aren't bothered by that at all.
Yeah, I would add, my wife sort of came up with the idea of putting two wire hanging baskets together, just the wire bit, and that goes around our feeder and it keeps the majority of pigeons off. You've got to look at what you're feeding them as well. So nibbles of peanuts rather than the full peanuts. Peanuts have been sort of found to be a little bit problematic if you throw them out onto the ground, for argument's sake. Then birds have been known to choke on those. So look at what you're feeding, and also just make sure it's very clean around the place. Squirrels tend to come where they know that they can grab a mouthful and disappear. So cleaning up underneath the feeders as well would help.
And that brings us to a couple of related questions, actually. One question: how do you cope with cats if you are attracting birds?
Um, I'm, I have a very much love-hate relationship with cats. I haven't found any way of keeping cats out of my garden. With my camera traps, I get between about 8 different cats from the local estate that will come and use my garden. The best method I would recommend is to get a water pistol, fill it with something citrus. Cats are intelligent; they will know, to avoid a space. So you can either try scaring the cat, so it associates your garden with being scared, and if it's really persistent, try and squirt it with something citrus, because cats hate cleaning citrus off their fur. So that's a method I've been told works well. I haven't yet managed to hit them with the water pistol, but if you do have a really persistent cat and it's causing you problems, there is no law against it, unfortunately. So, the best thing you can do is to try and scare the cat from the garden. There are various hypersonic devices, which I've never found work either. But I have been reliably assured that the citrus and association of fear with your garden is the best way to get cats not to use it or hang around under your feeders. Alan, have you got any other?
Oh, yes. Yes, I used to work at Centre Parks. I opened up the Centre Parks over at Longleat, and they at one point were selling lion's poo, and that's sort of the dominant creature there, so that tends to put cats off. Otherwise, scent of lemons. But what we were sort of talking about, actually, things. So the fizzy bottles of pop, if you take off the, sorry, that's not Americanism. If you take off the labels, fill them with water, then the reflection tends to sort of mess with their eyesight. It's really sort of talking about their senses. So they've got a good sense of smell. So many things citrus would be useful, and they also are attracted to certain plants, so avoid those. It's a case of moving things around. You've got those silhouettes of black cats with marble eyes. They work until the marbles go fuzzy. So the idea with cats, I think, is just keep on different things and move them around. So as you say, Nick, with the ultrasonic, it's the case that they get used to that. But if you start moving it around every now and again, hopefully they'll distract them.
Yeah.
Thank you. Another related question is, what about rats? Is there more danger of getting rats in a wild garden?
Yes, I have rats in my garden. Once rats have moved in, there's not much you can do about it. They are very, very savvy creatures. You can humane trap them if you want. If you're careful, you can lethal trap them. It's more if they're causing a problem or not. Rats are now a very established creature in the wild. We're not going to get rid of rats. So if you're worried about them, if they're getting into your house or something, then I'd say that you need to be trying humane traps and getting rid of them. But the best thing you can do is just try and avoid, as Alan was saying earlier, with respect to the scraps underneath bird feeders and things. It's just, if you really want to avoid those species, to try and be as tidy as you can. Spend a little bit more on those feeders, which have the catching devices in to prevent food landing on the floor. You might need to spend a little bit more on the no mess bird food, so you can get different grades of bird food. Some of them have been pre-husked so that the birds aren't searching through it and dropping a lot of the seed to the ground, and that can massively reduce the amount of waste that comes out of a bird feeder onto the ground as the birds are searching around for the particular ones that they're after. But I would say that if you run a wildlife garden, there's a very fair chance that you will have rats in there, unless they're causing a problem, and you can manage that by making sure that there's not too much loose food around. They're probably just going to have to be part of the environment that you've created.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Honest.
Yeah.
Sorry, Alan, you were going to say something.
We also have issues, and they're really rats, certainly within the parklands and everywhere else like that. As Nick says, they're naturally occurring. The old adage is you're never more than 6 feet away from a rat in the wild. It rings true. We tend to have problems more from the fact that people are feeding squirrels and actually come into our grounds in order to bring in alien food, which the rats use. If we're carrying out any works on sewage or anything else like that, then the rats tend to appear at those sort of stages, and then the population tends to die down. But as Nick says, I think it's sort of keeping everything clear, removing wrappers, removing the shelters which rats may use. But understanding that they are wild animals and they're expected to be around the place. One funny story that I had was a phone call that I received one day. And apologies if I embarrass anybody if they're online and they did it, but they phoned me up and said, your badgers are in our garden. And I had to say, yeah, they're not my badgers. They're animals. So same with bees. I had another phone call from some bees have got into my kitchen. It's, yeah, wild animals.
The only point I'd make around rats is I would absolutely implore people, please don't use poison around your garden. Like I cannot describe how bad it is for the other species that may end up secondarily feeding on a poisoned rat, and be that a fox by causing it organ failure, or more importantly the owl species if they eat a young rat which has been killed by poison. There was a paper out not too long ago, 100% of barn owl carcasses that were found had rat poison or mouse poison in them from prophylactically used poisons. So unless you've got a really strong reason to be using it, please try and avoid using those poisons because they have a massive knock-on impact in the environment.
Thank you. Another sort of related question to garden hygiene. Someone has asked, should you clean out bird boxes? And if so, how often, when? Do you know?
There's two answers to this. One is yes, and the other is no. And there are different reasons that you might want to go for it. So if the great thing about some species, particularly species like great tits, is they'll fill a bird box up with moss. If you choose to leave that nest in over the winter, then the next season, there's a species of bumblebee called a tree bumblebee, and it particularly looks for old tit nests to nest in. So if you've left a nest box up and it had grated in year 1, then tree bumblebee queen will find it in year 2. She'll start a colony in there in that moss, and they will exclude the tits from using that box for the year. So if you're looking to for that sort of result, which is something I look for in a lot of my boxes, will leave my boxes and won't touch them for a few years, and then I'll clean them out. If you're particularly after the same species to be using that box year on year, if you're particularly after blue tits or great tits to be using that box year on year, then yes, clean that box out, because it will be full of those ectoparasites at the end of the season that have fallen off the chicks, the fleas, the lice, the mites, and they will just sit there at the bottom in a sort of dormant stage, waiting for another nest to be put on top.
Yeah, no, I can't really answer that. We used to have a chap in Bristol called Wyn Lewis, who used to go around looking and inspecting the bird boxes, making sure, identifying the eggs. It's a great way of sort of monitoring what species you've got if you're looking after a large estate, which is sort of my sort of area. I agree with Nick. You may want to inspect the bird box and make sure that the mess which is left behind doesn't have dead bodies, have the mites, which you may want to clear out. But otherwise, birds are very good at sort of turning out any old nesting materials and may reuse it or parts of it to build their own nests the following year.
Thanks. A question about attracting slow worms. Would old clay roof tiles left in the garden attract slow worms?
So the key thing with slow worms is the connectivity. So it relies on you already having, if your garden or green space already has the connectivity where slow worms are present in the greater area, then yes, absolutely. If you have slow worms present and you let the grass grow longer and you put down any old clay tiles, basically the flatter the object, the better, because it needs to be really good at absorbing the sun's heat, and for the creature that's sitting underneath it to be able to benefit from that heat. Something like a brick will work as a refuge. I do use bricks as well, but they're not as good. You'll find that the very thin roof tiles, old bits of carpet, old bits of felt, particularly if they're dark, those are the things that those creatures are using. Relating back to cats earlier, slow worms are a favoured prey item of cats. Cats seem to love stalking them. So if you do really try and make a space like I've tried to do, which is good for slow worms, I'd really encourage you to try and avoid, particularly if you own a cat, letting them near it, because cats just use them as little pin cushions. They love playing with them and they fill them with holes, and the slow worms go off and sort of die somewhere in the grass. And I've found them like it. It's not very nice.
It's all a balance, what you really want.
Yeah.
This might be a question for Alan. Somebody is quite excited about the prospect of adopting a green space. Do you know who would be the best person to contact at Bristol Council to adopt a green space, to ask about that?
Yeah, so there's his name escapes me, but there's an allotment officer who's very sharp and supportive, and they're probably the best people to know whether there's something which is available, but they're also on the lookout for additional, well, they should be on the lookout for additional allotment space. There used to be an old system that if in a community somebody actually needed an allotment and the nearest one was too far away, then one would be provided, but I don't think that's the place anymore. So I think it's a case of looking at going to the allotment officer and just asking them. That would be my best advice.
Thank you. A question about hedges in the garden. What mix of species would you recommend for a hedge in the garden? One that wouldn't get too enormous and out of control.
So my favourite hedgerow species are the ones that are used to being, naturally coppiced. So obviously beavers were once a very good natural coppicer, and species like our wild cows, aurochs, were very good at crashing and breaking. So species that I would list off, dog rose is very, very important to plant to have in your hedgerow. Hawthorn, you can cut it very short and it withstands pruning very well. Hawthorn and sloe, both because they produce a really good crop of flowers. Elder, a really important plant, very nice flower, very nice berry. Alan, what have I missed?
Hazel, which you can then coppice.
The various different willow species, all do very well when they're hammered hard. Bramble actually can be very good in a hedgerow. Obviously provides the berries and creates that structure within it, provides that fortification. In the orchard book that we wrote, we spoke a lot about the thorns within a hedge. So dog rose, bramble, blackthorn, hawthorn. When you've got thorn structure within a hedge, particularly if you can allow it to get sort of to a metre or wider, then you're providing nesting places for thrushes, wrens, robins. But yeah, I'd say all of those plants will do well in a hedgerow. Field maple does well in a hedgerow. That can be cut pretty hard, but the former species can all be cut down very hard, right, almost to the ground, and then they'll grow back up if you need to. So if you just want to have a 1 metre high hedge, then sort of those 5 or 6 species are a good starting block.
There's also apples, so they've got things like hurdle apples, which you can train almost along the ground, so they don't grow much further than a foot high or something like that. Which looks a bit unnatural to me, but there are species of apples which you can have grafted or have been grafted onto very low-growing rootstock, and you can cut them back quite hard.
Yeah, great point. I should have mentioned that.
It's a teamwork.
Yeah.
Lovely. You were talking about bird boxes, and then I think also bee hotels, and someone has asked, how deep do solitary bee holes need to be?
The length of the drill bit. So whatever drill bit you've got, going all the way. So that can be, an average drill bit's maybe 3 or 4 inches long. Holes from the 6mm drill bit up to about the 10mm drill bit should provide for almost every species of solitary bee that you'll get in your garden. And you can put those, it also depends what substrate you use. So wood is an easy substrate to use, but you can also make clay bricks. And you can do that just by making basically a wattle and daub from a clay mud mixture, mix in with a bit of dried hay, make those into patty brick shapes, let them dry in the sun, prop them up on a window ledge or something, stick holes in them before you've let them dry, and there are a lot of different mason bees that will use those. It's a good fun thing to do with kids, that. Alan, have you got?
Sorry, I've got no. I think that's a perfect answer. No, I think within life sciences, we have had some really good academics who've been looking at bees, and the fact that there's popularity of the honeybees. Everyone seems to have gone over that, and that's maybe to the disadvantage of our native bees, solitary bees, etc. So any shelter that bees can be given is really beneficial.
Yeah, I haven't used them myself, but I've seen those bee bricks. So they're the size of a standard house brick, and you can just cut out a house brick from the side of your house or a shed and replace it with one of these bee bricks. And I've heard people have great success with those. Put one of those on a south-facing wall, and that's a lovely thing to have in the side of your house.
Good idea.
Well, thank you so much. I think we've got through all of the questions that have been posted. You've given us loads of food for thought, both of you. What I'm not surprised to see is that there has been questions about, is this being recorded? Can we see Alan's book list? So we will post that recording, and Alan, you kindly offered to send your PowerPoint presentation. Do send it and we'll post that as well. Thank you both so much. Loads of content in there. If any of us manage a fraction of that, I think we'll be pleased with the results. So thank you both very much. And thanks everyone for turning up. Anybody who enjoyed that and feels like making a donation, we'd really be grateful. Please, could you go to our website, West Bristol Climate Action, and use the PayPal link there to make a donation. If you're not on our mailing list and would like to be, please sign up. And anyone who would like to get involved, we'd love to hear from you. Just email us. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Thank you.